Hello. In this video, we are going to discuss company settings, another fundamental aspect of setting up your workshop software file. As a preface, we would say that any of the comments that we make in this video and all of our other videos are simply recommendations. You do not actually have to do them, but we do find that if you follow our recommendations, you will get a much better outcome for you setting up your workshop software file. Now, the first element we're going to touch on is the company settings. In this field, which is called the Australian business number for an Australian file, is where you actually enter your legally required number for your business. In Australia, it's called an ABN, and that is a 10-character field. I'm going to enter it in the way that it's going to look best on the invoice, which is spacing it in that format. And this needs to show up on every single invoice, otherwise the invoices are not classified as being legal. And you may have the same requirements in your local area where you are setting up your file and where you run your workshop. Now, the next field is going to be an MVRL, which is called a Motor Vehicle Repairer's License. In some states and territories, right, there is a requirement that you do have this information on your invoices, again, to keep them as completely legal as possible. Right. In the instance of New South Wales, which is where we're setting up this file, we do have a requirement, and that is a 5-character code, which is issued, and we would put that onto the invoice. The mobile company name is going to be a very, very important feature if you are using the SMS messaging system, because that will be the identifier which will enable your customer to see who the SMS message is coming from, so that they don't just get a message which has something written on it and they need to think twice to see who it's from, right? In this instance, I'm going to use smarts, right? The element that you need to remember in setting up the mobile company name is there is a limitation of 10 characters in this field. So you'll need to try to make your identifier for your SMS messages fit within that 10-character allocation. The next field we have is the time zone. This time zone extends all the way around the world, and it's going to be applicable to the time zone in which your business is located. All right, so once you understand what that is, I'm going to come in here and go Australian Eastern Standard Time, and that will fix all of my scheduling for my calendars. The next section we're going to look at is product settings. Now, one of the most important elements of the product set is your labor, which we're going to use, and this is going to impact directly on how your booking diary works. So, in order for the booking diary to work correctly, you need to have a default labor product. I have set up 2 in the system. One is called Repair, and it charges that at $110 per hour. This labor item will not trigger a service reminder for any of my customers. The other one, which I have also set up, is called Service. And this labor item, again, charges out at $110 per hour, but this will trigger a service reminder for my customers. Because we tend to do more repair work in the workshop than services, I'm going to choose Repair as being my default labor product. Reserve stock is an element which enables you to manage your inventory a little bit more closely, and it will not be discussed in this video. However, it will be discussed when we do the products video, because that is probably a clearer way of actually showing you how this works. To say the least, what it does is it allocates stock to a particular job ahead of that job actually being commenced. And it enables a scenario where another mechanic cannot take out a part that has actually been reserved because it is reserved for a particular job running on a particular day. The element to remember in reserve stock is simply that if a job does not happen and there was reserve stock attached to it, you need to delete that job and release the reserve stock back into your general inventory. Cost types for products. There are 2 types of costs which we actually can calculate things with. We go current cost, which is the last price that you paid for something. So let's say a Z9 oil filter, or the average cost, which is the amount of the average of what you have paid for those filters over a period of time. Generally, the period of time will be from the first time that it was entered into workshop software to the current date, or to the current last purchase. The general default for most workshops tends to be current cost. Down here we have the vehicle settings. There are multiple different types of vehicle groups that you can actually choose to allocate in workshop software. And each of these will actually work on your particular vehicles in your vehicle table. Right? Light commercial will give you a choice of all types of light commercial vehicles. Standard system types tends to be all types of car bodies. And for example, I can also go in and choose marine. That would give me various different types of marine body configurations. The same for motorcycles. The same for large diesel trucks, large prime movers, etc. And the same for trailers, etc. So it's probably a very good idea if you're just setting up your file to come in and look at these different types of body groups to see which ones will suit the requirements of your workshop. The next thing that we need to do is once we've picked the vehicle groups that we work with is to work out what the default service interval is. Now, to use the service reminder system and the rego renewal system and so on, you really do need to put in a default service interval for your vehicles. This tends to be a time period, as in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, as opposed to a kilometer rating. A kilometer rating cannot be calculated. It needs to work on a time basis. So in this particular instance, we're going to say the default service interval for most of the vehicles that we work with tends to be 12 months. If I have a vehicle that I've entered in for a new customer, for example, and the default service interval is different, I can simply go into the vehicle record and change the default service interval for that record. The same thing comes for the default method of contact for your customers. You have various different choices. You can go, the customer would prefer contact via email or via SMS or via document. Or they can completely go, we opt out, we don't want to receive any information from your workshop. Right? Generally, the two that tend to be used the most are email and SMS. Now, in the advanced vehicle fields, I'm going to turn on simply because I have two different vehicle groups. And that will give me different allocations or different capabilities within each of those vehicle records to specify what types of vehicles they are. If your workshop does tend to work with a customer who has a fleet of vehicles, and they refer to the fleet of vehicles or the vehicles within their fleet by a fleet code number, then you can toggle this on and it makes another field accessible in your vehicles table. You can also search for the vehicle by the fleet code number if required. The next thing we're going to look at are the settings for your booking diary. All right. And we come in here and say, okay, the workshop tends to work from the first booking would start at 8 o'clock and the shop closes at 5 p.m. So therefore, the last booking would probably be either 4 o'clock or 4:30. And if you have mechanics in the workshop, you're going to specify that generally if they work an 8-hour day, for example, and you have one mechanic, you would say the default work hours per day are 8. And that basically means that if you're going to give that mechanic 1-hour jobs, he would be able to carry out 8 jobs in a given day. If you have 2 mechanics, for example, you can come in here and just change this around to go 16, right? When you do this, what you will see is in the booking diary, you will see 2 specific circles, one for each mechanic. And as you allocate work to those mechanics using the booking diary, then all of their days will start to fill up. And this will be shown to you when we're doing the layout for a booking and also for an invoice. Now, show all shop for month, right, is a toggle which you can use, but it's generally not tending to be used simply because you'd like to see, for the most part, each of the mechanics' capabilities and how many hours they have allocated to work for them. You cannot really see that when you click on show all shop for month, because that just shows the whole shop as one big blue circle. And you cannot see unallocated jobs, and you cannot see the separate activities of your mechanics. So I tend to recommend that you choose show all shop for month as no. Description to job status comment, okay, is very, very important because when you're looking at your job center, this will show you what your actual jobs are all about. And that's based on how you've set them up in the booking diary and also how you've set up the invoice for the customer. The next thing that we're going to look at are your tax settings. Now in Australia, we use GST, right? So that is the GST is going to be the tax name. Our GST rate is 10%. So 10% on purchases, 10% on sales. And down here, we have the ability to turn around and determine whether or not when we show a customer an invoice, whether we are showing them the prices of the things which are being sold to them, inclusive or exclusive of GST. So as an example, if a filter was going to sell for $10, but with GST it was $11, and you chose prices include tax, then the price of the filter would be entered as $11, and it would show on the invoice as an $11 filter. And the GST will still also be calculated down at the bottom of the invoice. So generally, I tend to recommend that for transparency purposes, this tends to be the easiest option to choose. If you ever have a scenario where you are going to have to charge a customer freight as a separate item, simply because the part that you've brought in for them that day has been brought in by a separate freight forwarder, for example, and it's quite an extensive charge, you may wish to pass that on. You would also want to put the tax on the freight. Okay, so I would turn around and go yes to that. A rounding total is not necessarily what is expected within the accounting world as a rounding total. A rounding total in workshop software tends to be the following scenario. If a supplier has given you an invoice and the invoice is $30.98, that is what the supplier expects to be paid. When you enter the parts into workshop software under the supplier's invoice, it calculates out to the 4th decimal place. And therefore, it may turn around and at the end of the calculation sit there and go, all these parts work out to $30.99 as opposed to $30.98. The rounding total turned on gives you a little button at the bottom of the invoice which enables you to make a 1 or 2 cent adjustment, okay, to the value of the invoice, so that when that invoice is passed across to your accounting system, or whether it just stays in workshop software as a payable invoice, it will be recorded as a $30.98 invoice. So we recommend that this will give you additional flexibility when entering your supplier invoices. Generally, if you extend discounts to your customers, you would probably also want to include the tax on those, or having the discount include tax. So we would turn that on and say that that would be yes. This concludes the company settings for this video. And in the next video, we're going to look at invoice settings. Thank you very much, and we hope this has been beneficial to you.